very passionate about hospice care and palliative care because to me, that is lifestyle medicine.
Guys, today on the show, we have on Dr. Gary Shlifer, and someone who is well versed in all things in the hospice and medical field. Some of the recommendations and things today that he talks about is so beautiful. He takes a really modernized approach to medicine and like an ancient Western approach as well to just all things good and how to optimize a human being. And we get into so many crazy different things today. If you really wanted to have your mind blown, this is the podcast to listen to. We're getting in like some real deep stuff and it is mind blowing. I was thinking about this podcast for like an entire week afterwards. So I'm super excited for you guys to get into it. If you guys don't know what I do, I run a group coaching program called Overcome the Chaos, which holds people to invest in themselves and holds them accountable to perform at a higher standard than what they thought consistently. And I do that by showing you what to do, how to do, and more importantly, why to do it. And if you're interested in that group coaching program or any of my links to see anywhere, just look at the stuff below. Now, if you guys get any value out of this podcast or you like Dr. Shlifer or what we have to say on anything, please hit that like, share, and subscribe, sharing the story. We'd greatly appreciate that. I hope you enjoy this podcast as much as we did. We actually thought it was so amazing. We like really bonded on and off the podcast. So yeah, it was really awesome talking to Dr. Gary, and we'll see you on the inside, guys. Dr. Gary, thank you so much for coming onto the show, man.
Corey, thank you so much for having me. I'm so excited to be here.
Yeah, I'm really excited to have you on. So let's kick off start of the show. What have you been learning recently, which has been very beneficial or interesting to you?
It's interesting. My approach to healthcare in general is very much like what I think is like a true integrative approach. So, I committed the last few years of my life to learning alternative treatments, nutrition, lifestyle. Alternative is not the best word. I think lifestyle medicine. And that's what I've invested myself into because I'm a trained internal medicine physician. I'm board certified in internal medicine here in the States. I was trained, at a really high level institution in Indiana, IU. And I got a really good Western medicine foundation. And I think a lot of people, once they discover lifestyle medicine or they get upset with Western medicine system, they sort of write it off. And what I'm doing, and I think it's really important, is that it is really staying up to date with new medications, new strategies in Western medicine, because I think that the real key to health is understanding that you cannot be healthy without the lifestyle component. You cannot be healthy if you don't consider some form of supplementation, even if you think about it, just a sun exposure, if you don't want to take a vitamin D pill, right? But at the same time, we have really powerful medicines. We have really powerful interventions. And while the drug companies make tons of money on this stuff, they're providing meaningful tools. So sort of over the last few months, after being on the front lines of COVID, I'm replugging back into the Western medicine system to see what new medicines are out there, to see what the new strategies are. I'll be honest, it's mostly disappointing. It's mostly disappointing, but there's a lot of great stuff out there. Without getting into the specifics, I just want to know, I want to know all the drugs. I want to know what are the new strategies. For example, I just met with Janssen Pharmaceuticals, and they have a product called Spravato, which is in the States here, it's insurance approved ketamine therapy. And I think ketamine is an awesome option for people that are really struggling with their mood or addiction. So I'm almost going back to my roots and making sure I'm up to date with the traditional or sort of the Western medicine practices, so that I could be of most use to people. I think people find alternative providers all the time, and that's all they get, or they go to a Western medicine doctor and all they get is statin. And it's about using both thoughtfully and really understanding what is the patient in front of you, what will benefit that patient. Because some people come to me and they're like, I'm going to do a lifestyle change, and they're not. And those people need some medication management. So I'm coming back full circle.
So what does that sort of look like? Like if you, for example, I know if you have any stories or examples that you can use, because obviously I know you're not necessarily names or anything like that, but if you have any examples of use where someone sort of comes to you and you're like, oh, so these are the things that like I've helped someone with.
I'll mention someone from today. Like, so there's a gentleman, he's like in his 80s. He comes to me. He doesn't have known heart disease. He had just discovered sort of low carbohydrate ancestral diet. And he started it and that was okay. And he's like, I want to get off all my meds. I don't want to be on a statin anymore, yada, yada, yada. And I'm like, okay, let's do it. Right. He met me about a year and a half ago. So we did that. But he, while changing his diet, did not exercise. He does not do some of these other interventions that I think are really powerful. Fasting strategies, cold therapy. Sorry. There's just various things you can do really to make your metabolism healthier. So I actually put him back on a statin. I picked one in particular that is more likely to increase your HDL, because I don't really care about LDL and total cholesterol, but his HDL plummeted after I took him off the statin. Not everyone could make all of the lifestyle changes, and not everyone's metabolism could be healed, especially if you're in your 80s. So that's an example where I didn't like the statin that was picked, and I'll just keep those private just for whatever, his privacy, but I didn't like his original medicines. I stopped them. He did not do better. He followed some recommendations, not others. And I thought that the risk benefit analysis to start a low dose statin that would help his HDL made a lot of sense for him. So that would be like one example where I'm really thinking about the individual and we're really making a risk benefit analysis for that individual. I was concerned about peripheral vascular disease. So I think that's an example of where I will try anything and everything, and I'm going to meet my patients where they're at. And through that, my goal is to gain their trust, because sometimes you need to use a medicine, because an HDL of 33 is unacceptable, right? And if he's not going to do exercise and the diet is not improving it, I don't want that. And so we'll see his blood work every 3 months. Maybe I'll change the medicine again. Maybe we'll stop it again. I don't know yet. But I'm not going to say you're on this drug forever. We're only going to go up on the dose. That's all you get. That's not my approach. He might get a whole different drug. He might get no drug in the future if he starts exercising.
Man, what are your thoughts as well on like ancestral living and then ancestral health in terms of, just the diet, the lifestyle, the organ meats, all of those things? Like, what's your sort of view on that?
Yeah, I think that people are myopic with it, like in the sense that it's not enough to just add liver to your diet. It's not enough to just be carnivore. Like for me, an ancestral approach to health is, how do we replicate the experience of our ancestors? So certainly nutrition is a huge part of it, certainly not eating processed foods, but it doesn't mean you don't ever eat carbs. We definitely saw carbs from time to time in our natural sort of evolution. But more importantly, it's some of these other lifestyle components, deep breathing. Like in the Western world, we don't, unless you're exercising, you're not deep breathing. Deep breathing is so powerful. And if you guys haven't tried it, I love Wim Hof. If you haven't heard of Wim Hof, Google him. He's got a great book, a great app. It's a very, very simple approach. There's a variety of other breathing strategies. This replicates our natural experience. Cold immersion therapy, right? People hear about that, going into a cryo or taking cold showers. Instead of thinking about it from science, just imagine what it was like before heaters and the kind of homes that we have. You were cold, like it was normal. And how did you control your temperature? You breathed and you did what you could. Heat therapy, right? It's not just the sauna. If you think about traditional cultures, sweat lodges, like the huts that traditional tribes would make to get sweaty in. I mean, these are incredibly powerful to change your immune system and your metabolism. High intensity interval training, it's this one of these words, HIIT, that we use, but it's because that's how we exercise. That's like what we did. You ran after your food. You had to escape things. I mean, those short bursts of explosive movements for short periods of time with lots of rest. It doesn't just, you don't need a bunch of studies to tell me it makes sense. It makes sense because of the animal that we are. And, you know, I was really, really inspired by the anthropological and archaeological record, because to me, that's more hard science than trying to do a study on, you know, food or exercise. I think the anthropological record tells us a lot about what we were and what we are now. And the reality is we haven't changed much in a few 100,000 years. And what has changed is our lifestyle. Agriculture over the last 20, 30,000 years, you know, industrialization of our food system. Those are the things that are making us sick. You can't change that. Most people can't go move onto a farm and, you know, grow all their own food and raise all their own animals. So you kind of have to figure out how to mimic those experiences in the world you live in today. So yeah, I mean, go ahead.
I say getting your balls out into the sun, good idea.
Absolutely. You know, I think about it as like 5 stressors, acute stressors you can leverage on a day-to-day basis to make yourself more healthy. In addition to, I'm saying like this is in addition to, you know, an ancestral style diet. We call it a sapien diet, whatever you want to call it. It's a carnivore-ish, low carb diet, like, right? But the 5 things I want people to think about is, and I mentioned them already, but just in summary, intermittent fasting, cold therapy, heat therapy, high intensity interval training, and deep breathing. You can do those strategies, maybe 1, maybe 3 of them every day, but at least do 1 of them every day. So for me, I'm really, really busy. My practice is growing. Sometimes I can't get in the gym. I mean, it's been a while. It's really hard. But when I do, I lift hard and short because I don't want to hurt myself. I've not been training regularly. If I run, I tend to do sprints. I'll do like a nice light jog, get into a good headspace, and then I'll do like sprints. But I fast every day, every day. And if I'm feeling not so good, or if I liberalize my diet and I go out with my friends and I don't do so good, I do a longer fast. And I make sure to do it right. I hydrate, I take my minerals. I'm really big on educating people about appropriate salt, magnesium, potassium intake. Super underappreciated in the Western world. In our world, it's don't eat salt, don't eat salt, don't eat salt. Then you come in all sick to the emergency room and I infuse you with normal saline, which is salt water. It's insane to say don't eat salt. And then when you get sick, you give them salt water. Like, so which one is it, right?
So what does salt do? I'd love to know, actually just dive into that a little bit, because I dive into it. Like for me, I love Celtic salt. I just did a whole bunch of research on it for myself personally. I'm like, cool. So it's lower in sodium, higher in other things, which is really important to get like some minerals in. But like, I'd love to hear from your experience in terms of, you know, why is salt so good and how does it actually work? Or
yeah, I think it's a lot more simple than people think. I love that you did research, and there's obviously salts that contain more nutrients and minerals. I love that. And I think that's, you know, when you're nerds like you and me that obsess over this stuff, you can dive deep into it. My approach is simple, simple, simple. How can I teach the most people the things that make sense? So when I talk about salt, it starts here. Go grab a packet of iodized table salt. Now, again, I'm going to talk about America. I don't know I'm pretty sure it's like this throughout the world, but iodized table salt, the traditional salt that we use, there's 4 ingredients. One of them is dextrose. That's not salt. That's a processed corn product that is highly inflammatory. It has no business being. I'm going to see, I think I have a salt packet here. No, there's no ingredients. But anyway, you guys can check me. I checked it out a million times. Then you look at things like Morton's kosher salt and you think it's also clean, but there's like an anti-caking agent and sometimes other stabilizing chemicals. So what I tell people on a simple level, if whatever salt you're using, look at the back. What is the ingredient? Salt is salt. That's it. There's no magic here. There should be nothing else in your salt. So that's on a simple level. Going deeper, I think that understanding that like a mine salt, like we have here Redmond's real salt, which comes from a mine in the States. I really like that because it's the most natural form of the product. I think Celtic salt is similar. But even pink Himalayan salt that comes from a mine in Pakistan. Like that's like what it is, and that makes sense to me as a product. Then I go into further details about like, okay, well, when they did the studies on high blood pressure and salt, they were using iodized table salt. So that's not a good study. They were also just looking at men, middle-aged to older men with high blood pressure. That's not a great sample of the population. It's very hard to control. So I'm not really convinced on the hypertension, the salt causing hypertension. I think people are eating shit. Sorry, but they're eating
You can swear as much as you like.
bad food, and then in addition to the bad food, they're adding salt to flavor it. Decades ago, people were smoking all the time, and it kills your taste buds, so they were adding even more salt. So I think there's a lot of reasons why the salt guidelines are so obsessively to limit salt, but I think that's too, again, to use that word, myopic. It's too short-sighted. You need salt. You cannot survive without salt. When you are dehydrated, if you drink free water, it will not stay in your body. It will not be intravascular if it doesn't have minerals, if you don't have oncotic pressure. And if you're eating a really low protein, low fat diet, you're going to have low protein levels, which is also a component of the oncotic pressure in your bloodstream. So you could drink all the free water you want. You're going to pee it out. And then through that process, you're going to waste more salt. So consuming sodium chloride, traditional salt is essential. If you're eating a really bad, standard American diet, as they say, SAD diet, you probably don't want to add salt because it's full of that stuff and it's not the good stuff. But if you're eating a very ancestral diet, a sapien diet, then you want to add salt to your foods to give you the minerals you need and to keep the fluids in your body. Then we go deeper. Magnesium. Magnesium is so important for all metabolic processes. And that tends to be depleted in our food system in general. Plants, often monocropped, often with pesticides. The soil is depleted of nutrients. So you're not like eating the healthiest food when you're eating, the produce in our stores. We're not soaking in baths where we can absorb some magnesium through our skin. We're just living such an abnormal life that I feel like thinking about supplementing magnesium, making sure you're getting your sodium in your body, making sure you get a little potassium. So I like this really great product called Element, LMNT. There's a bunch of these now. They're little salt packets. They're super clean salt. They contain sodium, potassium, and magnesium. And then oftentimes they're flavored with a little stevia. People are like, oh, well, that's bad. That's a chemical. Right, but it's better than Gatorade, right? Gatorade's a great story. Gatorade, I mean, the football players are dropping like flies on the field because they were dehydrated. When you're sweating, you're releasing salt water. That's why it tastes salty on your skin after you sweat. If you just replace the water, you're not replacing what you've lost. So Gatorade was a genius idea. But what did they do? They added sugar, they added more sugar, they added more sugar, they added more sugar. And now it's just like candy with some salt in it, So I like the salt packets as an option for someone who's fasting a lot, who's busy. I don't have time in the middle of my day to sit there and twist in my pink Himalayan salt or my Celtic salt and add a little lemon. I wish I did. If I did, I wouldn't need the packets, but that's something that I use as a little biohack to keep me feeling good. Other thoughts on magnesium? I think magnesium is so important. It relaxes your muscles. It helps you go to the bathroom. It's good for your brain. And so, yeah, I actually I use a magnesium complete, which is 4 different magnesium salts. Sometimes I add to that magnesium biglycinate. A lot of good evidence that that's a really powerful form of magnesium. I don't know that you can overdo it unless you take too much magnesium citrate and then you've got diarrhea. And that's what I tell my patients. Take my magnesium complete You'll feel good. You can increase the dose. You start having a little loose stool. You've gotten to your dose. It's simple. Um, I couldn't, I think it's one of the biggest misunderstandings that salt is bad for you. I mean, I have patients with kidney disease. They're like, their kidney doctors like low salt diet, low salt diet, low salt diet. So they cut all the salt out of their diet. Then they come to me, their sodium is like 132. They feel weak and fatigued. I send them back to the nephrologist, and what do? They order salt. To me, that's insane.
Yeah.
That's insane to prescribe a salt tablet. Why is that insane? Because it makes more sense to have a salt packet and make it water, because that's how it should be. That's how you would consume it. It makes more sense to say, hey, liberalize your diet, but let me educate you about appropriate salt, right? Like the healthy salts, like what we're talking about. So instead of educating people on the nuance, instead of having a campaign against iodized table salt, which makes no sense, or at least demand that they don't add dextrose to that product, we're missing the mark when it comes to really helping people feel good, And I think that minerals are essential to that.
Oh man, I love this conversation so much. It's been a while since I've wanted to go like a bit deeper onto salt and stuff because I'm super passionate about it. Oh man, that is some absolute fire right there. So thank you. Also, I'd like to know, what are you currently most passionate about? What really sort of sets your soul on fire?
I mean, a couple things. I think we botched this whole COVID thing. We don't need to talk about it. I think we made tons of mistakes. I don't know that it was a conspiracy. I think it was a scary situation. But I would really like to see the leaders, healthcare providers, and even the public at general step back and look at what's happened with a very, very thoughtful sort of like a 10,000 square foot view. What did we do right? What did we do wrong? We don't need to argue about vaccines. We don't need to argue about anything. We need to say, what did we do wrong and what did we do right, so that in the future we do better. I'm very passionate about that. I've had multiple episodes of my podcast censored. It's really sad because I never said anything bad. I just opened conversation. I asked questions. I shared data. It's alarming to me how unwilling people are to talk about it. And then sort of secondary to that, and I think this is probably, if I was like independently wealthy and didn't need to have a job, I would pursue aggressively mental health. I think mental health, we're seeing the side effects of COVID's lockdowns, but even before that, mental health was its own pandemic. Suicide, depression, anxiety, poor sleep. Even our rates of obesity, it's like a chicken and egg. You get obese because you're depressed, or you're depressed and then you get heavier. And it's like this, instead of focusing on like drugs for obesity or drugs for depression, we should really think about a really holistic, maybe ancestral, if you will, approach to mental health. I think that there's a whole world of psychedelic medicine out there that will really heal people. I think there's ways to treat mood disorders, addiction, with experiential things, such as a psychedelic experience, with assisted psychotherapy, with intention setting, and a really thoughtful setting approach, and real integration where you figure out what it means, with the goal of not being dependent on a medication every day, but rather having a tool in your disposal. Like so many traditional cultures would use psychedelic medicines as a rite of passage or as a healing experience. That's a real way to help the population. I obviously the tide is turning, and people have opened their mind to it, and there's obviously like legal changes that are happening. And in the States, there's some really powerful research being done on psilocybin and MDMA. We know how powerful THC can be, and CBD. We have this other tool called ketamine, a very powerful drug. I think we just mentioned there's a new pharmaceutical version of it called Spravato. And I think that I love that the pharmaceutical industry is opening that door. So I would really love to see less depressed people. I would really love to see people with more, not even less depressed. I would like to see people with more tools, right? And when I say the holistic approach, it's everything we just talked about. If you're jumping into a cold bath and you could sit there and deep breathe for 2 to 5 minutes, when you come out of that, you're going to be less depressed. You're going to feel better. When you go into a long fast, even just a day, you go into a ketotic process, which is therapeutic for your mind. The ability for your gut to clear out and just be free of that food constantly in your belly. These are all simple approaches. And when you pair that with an experiential drug like ketamine or MDMA, psilocybin, any one of these, you can transform yourself, and you could be not dependent on medicines or a therapist even. You could use those tools intermittently when things get heavy instead of depending on them every day. So I think that's an old passion and a present passion. And then I guess my third thing that seems weird, but is not, is end of life care. I do a lot of hospice work. I think that we have divorced ourselves from the experience of death. And I think that people think that that's like protecting children or protecting family members. But what it sets them up for is not being able to deal with the real outcomes of life, which is everybody dies, right? So by there's this great statistic in the 1920s and 30s, 80% of people died in their home. So people were connected to death. They respected death. They understood what it meant to be a human. They valued death. People used to put their dogs down, and they used to have animals on their properties, and they would experience death regularly. Now people have never seen a chicken be killed, or if they do, they're like, oh my God, shy my kid's eyes away from it. Like, no, it's not about being sad for the animal. It's about respecting the animal. It's the gift that the animal gives you through their death is so important. And simultaneously preparing people for the end of their life. It's usually less the patient and it's the families. And there's so much undue suffering because of that poor preparation. And what I was saying is, I distracted myself, is 80% of people used to die at home, 20% of people died in the hospital. As of the early 2000s, it was flipped. It was 20% of people would die at home and 80% would die in the hospital. You add to that a pandemic, and these people are dying in the hospital alone, right? Because the hospitals were afraid. And so I'm very passionate about hospice care and palliative care, because to me, that is lifestyle medicine. Knowing when to say, no, this 90-year-old person is not going to respond well to 4 surgeries. Like, no, this lady who's 80 pounds overweight and has back problems, if you do surgery on her, she's never going to walk. Like, be real with her and put her on palliative care. So to me, that's lifestyle medicine. So I'm all over the place, but dealing with pandemic more thoughtfully, dealing with mental health in a more ancestral approach to it, and embracing end-of-life care and re-educating humans on what it means to be alive and what it means to get old and die, or be young and die, and being ready for it instead of so fearful. All 3 of those things that I just brought up, what is the problem with them? Fear. The doctors are afraid to do those jobs. It's scary to talk about death. It's scary to talk about a new drug that was vilified for 40 years or 50 years. It's scary to talk about COVID if you don't believe everything that's on the news, or if you actually just want to ask a question. Yeah, it's scary, but fear should not drive us. We should be excited for all this information and this amazing way I could communicate with a young, smart guy in Australia, and we can learn from each other and we can share our stories. Like, there's so much good in the world, but I worry that the fear of change, the fear of anything outside of the status quo has compromised our ability to be healthy.
Why do you think those three things are really important?
Because that's happiness. Like, uh, what is the point of life for me? It's to be happy. Happiness does not mean you're like, ha 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 ha. Yeah, no, that's not happy. Happy is being real. Like, when you're like with the end of life care situation, when you have a 92-year-old grandparent or family member that's got dementia, happiness is honoring them by not causing suffering. Happiness is spending what time you can with them at home rather than putting them in a home or in the hospital to be poked and prodded, to mine every dollar out of their insurance before you say, okay, enough is enough. Happiness is showing respect to each other. With the mental health, that's obvious, right? If you have no tools to be happy, if you don't understand that you could go take a cold shower and it's okay, or you could skip a few meals, that's okay. You'll feel better, actually. You have no tools. Your only tool is, doctor, I need an antidepressant. That's not happiness. That's bandaging and numbing. And I think the way I'm saying happiness is also learning to accept sadness. Like, you feel all the feelings. You're a human being. You feel all the feelings. So being able to get sad and having tools to deal with it and then coming out of it, that to me is happiness. Like, and it all comes back to the first question you asked me. That's what we did for millions of years as a hominid, and for hundreds of thousands of years as a Homo sapien. And if you look at the research, there's a really inspiring book was Sapiens, The Story of Us by Yuval Harari. Really beautiful book. You guys should all read it if you haven't. It was transformative for me. He makes this point that once we moved into agriculture and we started building these big cities and farming and raising animals in these small like farm structures, you developed an elite class and a peasant class. And the vast majority of people were less happy. They live a more poor, a worse quality of life. There was more problems for them. Yes, some people got to live really great lives, but it was a very, very small percentage. And that's basically still true, I think, through technology and through, the evolution of medicine and stuff. There's a bigger middle class and people generally are not all peasants. But what they don't realize is they're not healthy, right? Like 60% of them are obese in America. That's not happy and healthy. That's slowly being sick. It's like a slow toxin. And now we've normalized the idea that if you're 75, it's okay to have diabetes and hypertension and obesity and sleep apnea and be on 10 drugs. Like, they've normalized that, right? And that to me is not going in the right direction. And more importantly, it's not necessary. Like, we have the resources, we have the knowledge. You just have to change the way we've been doing it for the last 100 years. It's not that hard. But for a variety of financial and social reasons, it's not going in the right direction.
For anyone who's listening to like the last 10 minutes, that was absolute fire. I was listening to the same experience as me when I was just like so much yes to everything that you were saying then, man. Wow. So another question, like that was, loved everything that you said then, especially even with the psychedelic stuff, the death stuff. I think it's so important to have this conversation. Anyone who's listening to this, like, you're blessed to listen to this. And I do want to ask is, so for people in terms of like tools and other things as well, let's say they're at that sort of stage in their life where they're like, cool, I'm ready to like invest in myself, or I want to do something about this. What would you sort of encourage people to think about or encourage them to, potentially start doing?
Yeah, I got an answer for that one too. A lot of this, guys, comes from like 5 years of, I started my practice 6 years ago. I called it Evolve Healthcare. I had no idea what I was doing. I'm trained as a hospital doctor, a sick person doctor, but I really felt the calling. And all of this stuff comes from seeing patient after patient after patient, listening to podcasts, reading books, and figuring out what makes sense. And a lot of the books and the references I've made mention of, they just develop these ideas. Nothing I'm saying are, in my opinion, are novel. I've said zero new ideas. I just integrate things and I make my own judgment. So to answer your question, if you want to be healthier, there's 5 things you should think about every day. Sleep, sun, stress, movement, and food. I had a better like words for them, but those are the 5 things that what can I do better every day? So first of all, it's food, right? Food. There's a reason why it's really, this community is based around a low carb ancestral diet, because food is the heart of health. If you're just starting on this journey, there's 2 things you have to do. Anything in a box, anything with more than 10 ingredients, anything where you look at the ingredients in the back and you don't know what the word is, get rid of it. Eat whole foods, eat things that you know what the names are, and do a 16-8 method. 16-8 method is not fasting. You read about it online as 16-8 fasting, 16 hours of fasting. It's not fasting. It's just, I'm not going to eat a bunch of junk, and I'm going to eat 2 meals a day in an 8-hour window. And the rest of the 16 hours, I'm going to hydrate, have my minerals, have my supplements, maybe have a little caffeine. It's not a fast. It's not really a fast. A fast is like 18, 20, 24 hours. Maybe you get into that second day. And you shouldn't do that every day either, especially if you haven't trained your body. So if you're just starting out, cut out the boxed nonsense. And if you're not sure, just turn around the ingredient label. If you don't know the words, you don't know what it is, done. And do 16-8. Make it lunch and dinner. 12 to 8. And then if you really want to go to the next step, make it 1 to 7. Tighten that window down a little. Eat beautiful food. Don't calorie restrict. You will automatically calorie restrict because you cannot eat for the rest of the 16 or 18 hours. So you're calorie restricting, right? But don't do that there's too many negatives. If you do that, make sure you're hydrating and make sure you're consuming enough minerals, because if you take the junk food out, you need to add salt back in your diet, or else, like we talked about, you're not going to do well. You're going to get this keto flu and headaches and just feel like crap, right? So that's the simple day 1 move on nutrition, right? Sun is the obvious thing. If your lifestyle permits it, during high noon, when the angle of the sun is above your head, so your shadow is smaller than your body, you know that the sun rays that are coming through will hit your skin and make vitamin D. That's the only time you make vitamin D. If you run in the morning or go for walks in the morning or end of the day, you'll get a tan, but you will not make vitamin D. So if you can, take your shirt off, put on some little shorts, get in the sun. You don't need to be there for it. You're not tanning. 10, 15 minutes. If you're really fair skinned, 3-5 minutes, and you'll start feeling the overwhelming benefits of sun exposure, because you are a solar powered creature. You cannot do well without healthy sun exposure. And if you can't, and if you can't, vitamin D3, K2 supplementation is another way to go. It's fine. And just going through those 5. So movement. So look, not everyone could do high intensity interval training. I get it. Not everyone, but you can double dip. You can take a 20-minute walk in a tank top in the middle of the day. Just do something. And whatever you're doing, see if you can get your heart rate pumping. And if you want to go to the next step, grab some weights. You don't need to go crazy. You just need to do some resistance training. It's very, very powerful, even in small doses. It's about consistency with exercise and movement, and not so much how hard you can go on any given day and how much weight if you just do it consistently, you'll see the changes. Sleep. I mean, we could do a whole podcast on it. It's, but probably after food, sleep is the next most important one. If you haven't Googled the word sleep hygiene, Google the word sleep hygiene. It's very simple, but if you actually read it and process it, you'll see what we're talking about. And if you just want what you can do today, create an evening routine, create a morning routine. We are creatures of habit. Have a routine at night where you get rid of your phone an hour before, no blue light in your face. Read a book, take a shower. Maybe that's the time to take your supplements. Relax. You can't sleep if you're just like going, and then you crash out. That's not good. And then in the morning, whatever your routine is, step out into the sun. You have receptors in your body that tell you to wake up, and they also help regulate your circadian rhythm. So in order to sleep better at night, you should get sun exposure first thing in the morning to let your body know it's wakey time. So that then when the nighttime comes, you're sort of set, right? And so there's that. Last one is stress. Those other 5 things I mentioned earlier in the podcast, those 5 things you can do, I actually present them as acute stressors because we are suffering from chronic stress, eating too much, inflammatory foods, telephones ringing all the time, like terrible shit on the news all the time. Those chronic stressors suppress your ability to create healthy hormone balance, to just be your best. So by leveraging those acute stressors during the day, you can suppress the negative effects of chronic stress. And those are the 5 things. So and that little spiel, just pick one and start tomorrow, and then make a list, and then add another one the next day and see what happens. And then you'll feel better, and then be like, oh, this works. And then you keep going. And then it's simple.
I'm so excited because like I didn't know that noon thing when you're like right under the sun. That's when the best is. I've got an ice bath in in my garage, which is like just a big freezer that's frozen full of ice. So I'm so excited today to get some of that sun at midday and be like, yes, give me the D, and then jump into the ice bath after that and be like, ah.
I wish I remembered. There's like it's basically the kind of UV light that's required to change the cholesterol molecules in your skin, because it's cholesterol, right? Vitamin D is a prohormone. So all hormones come from cholesterol. So that particular kind of UV light, it only penetrates when the sun is like sort of above your head, because the atmosphere will block those rays when it's down low. So the time of day is important, but also like the exposure to the skin. If it's just your face or just your arms, it's not enough skin exposure to generate a meaningful amount of vitamin D. So there's a whole science to it. There's a great like talk by Ivor Cummins called D is for Debacle. We have on my Sapien podcast, we had Dr. Gould on, we had Dr. Gabe on. I mean, there's tons of people talking about vitamin D. So that's a subject that is very, very important, because it's turning out to be involved in so much of your health, more than just like bone health, right? It's your mood, it's your immune system, it's your gut. It's a very, very powerful molecule. And it's because we don't spend time in the sun that everyone is vitamin D deficient. And I swear to you, I check everyone's vitamin D levels. It's like 70-80% of people are well below 30.
What about people who are just scared that I don't want to get in the sun because I don't want to get burnt, wrinkly, and get cancer? Because we're told in Australia, they're like, stay away from the sun. You'll get cancer and die. And I'm like, oh man, I disagree with that. I feel so good every time I get into the sun.
Yeah, I mean, look, it's an education thing. If you get a sunburn, it's bad. It increases your risk of skin damage and cancers. But you shouldn't burn. Thoughtful sun exposure. Remember, as hunter-gatherers, we would be outside all the time. So as it got warmer, you would get more and more sun exposure, and you would build that base layer. So the melanin would increase, and you'd be more ready for longer exposure to sun and the hotter sun as the summer came through. Also your ancestry. If you have dark skin, you can tolerate more sun exposure. And in fact, you need more sun exposure to make vitamin D, because the melanin is blocking those sun rays. So, where your ancestors came from matter. How you get the sun exposure over the course of the year matters. It's far more complicated and nuanced than the sun is bad, you're gonna get sun cancer. It's not. And again, if you're worried about the neck and the face and sun damage, I hear you. Put on a big hat, block your face, block your neck area, and put it on your body. And the skin on your face is a little more sensitive, so it's probably reasonable to really protect this part, especially the ears can burn. So be thoughtful.
Makes sense. So, man, we talked about so many good things, and thank you so much for sharing all of the stuff. There were some real good parts in here that I took in myself personally really deeply. I was like, that is some of the best stuff. So for people who want to find, like, listen to more of your stuff, find your podcast, where can they go search and look at some stuff?
Yeah, so I'm most active on my Instagram. It's at drgaryevolve. My practice here in Woodland Hills, which is Los Angeles, California, is called Evolve Healthcare, and that's at evolvehealthcare.com. I do some consultations for people if they're out of state and they're far away. It's sort of non-medical, and I could give some guidance. And then check out sapien.org. So we got connected through Brian Sanders, who is the creator of Food Lies documentary, which is forthcoming. He's got a great podcast. And then we started the Sapien podcast, where I do more of this. That's a fun one to listen to. That's really it. Sapien.org, evolvehealthcare.com, and at drgaryevolve on Instagram.
So good. And if you'd like to leave everyone with one challenge, if you could think of them a challenge to give people who are listening, so after this podcast, they actually have to go take action on something, what would you challenge someone to do? Get the next, step or ball rolling.
You're talking about with lifestyle or just a fun one? I mean, look, if you're not doing 16-8, start doing 16-8 tomorrow. 16-8 is a no-brainer. It's easy. Give yourself a few weeks to get adjusted. Make sure you're getting your hydration and minerals. That is step number one. Number two is get that healthy 5 to 20 minutes of sun during high noon time. And honestly, sort of unrelated, after these last couple years, man, don't be afraid to see your friends. Don't be afraid to see your family. Go give people a hug. Like, we got to move on. If we keep this up, people are going to be miserable, and it's only going to get worse. So it's time to embrace that we're human beings. We live in a weird world. And yes, we have to be cautious, but we have to have meaningful human interactions, touching each other, all that stuff. Like, if you haven't seen your grandparents in a long time, go spend some time with them. I don't know. Like, it's the most important thing you can do is really connect with your fellow human being. It's just so important.
Go give and receive some damn love.
Got it. Absolutely.
I love that. Oh, May, well, thank you so much for coming onto the show. Anyone who's listening, all the links will be linked below in the descriptions. And yeah, thanks again for coming on and sharing your wisdom.
My pleasure, Corey. Such a pleasure.